Shalom, shalom. Good morning. That's the way a Jewish person would say hello. It means may you have perfect peace. It's usual to respond, so I'll try again. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
I'm dressed as a first century shepherd might have been dressed. What's the most well-known part of the Bible, do you think? Chapter in the Bible? Psalm 23. We have it many, many times. But it's often misunderstood. For instance, we think of a Western shepherd with his long crook. This is my staff. It's a weapon, same as this. But the shepherd imagery in the Bible is very important. Peter calls Jesus that great shepherd of the sheep. What we don't realize very often is that shepherds were despised. Yes, a shepherd king like David was obviously led to people believing in, a king's role as taking care of his people. But they were despised as individuals. Think about David himself. He wasn't even invited to the banquet. And when Samuel asked for him, Jesse said, "You don't want to see him, do you? He's out looking after the sheep." Also, shepherds tended to be very smelly. We think of shepherds as going home at night, but these shepherds would stay out and take care of their sheep 24/7. And so they often were away from everybody else. They also became thought of as untrustworthy because a shepherd would not be allowed to witness in a court case. They wouldn't trust his word. So it's interesting that God chose shepherds to be the first witnesses of the birth of Jesus. I'm dressed as a shepherd, as I said. I might have dressed in a sheepskin rather than a camel hair coat. More about this camel hair coat when I talk about John the Baptist, who wore one. And I might have worn boots instead of sandals. But other than that, I'm a village man. Jesus was a village man, may have dressed like this too. And trying to remember what I was going to go on and say. But the shepherd keep looking after his sheep would do it, as I said, 24/7. All the shelter that they need. And so let's look at Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I will have everything I need. Food, shelter, protection. And also providing for me and guiding me and watching after me. I like to think of David actually sitting down on the hillside and thinking, what I do for my sheep, God does for me. And he would take out his panpipes and compose the psalm. This is how he would play it, and I can't play it very well. I can't even get a note now. I'm going to put these down. Mine are cracked, so they don't make too big a pleasant a noise. But the shepherd would not throw this away. He would bind it up if it was broken, so that he can make sweet music with it again. And in Isaiah, it talks about a bruised reed he will not break. And that's true for us. He will not just throw us away if we're hurt. He will bind us up and make good music with us. He makes me lie down in green pastures, the psalm goes on. We think of easy to find grass, but not in Israel. I've been to the shepherd's fields outside Bethlehem. It's just scrubby tufts of grass. And we read of when Joseph went to look for his brothers. They had gone from Hebron to Shechem to find grass. That's 50 miles away. And when he got to Shechem, they'd gone on from there to Dothan. That's another 30 miles. 80 miles trying to find the food for their sheep. And the problem is, when the sheep gets there, it's gone 80 miles looking, it stays standing up. So it says the shepherd makes him lie down in green pastures. And God gives us a Sabbath. And those of us who wear collars often work 7 days a week, and we don't take the Sabbath. But it's a good thing for all of us. We may need rest. He leads me beside still waters. It goes on. The shepherd leads because sheep will follow the shepherd. Goats will not. They have to be driven. In Israel, sheep and goats often look the same, but you will find the sheep following the shepherd, whereas the shepherd will have to drive any goats. It's very interesting. Samuel Shaw, who founded the Bible Come to Life exhibition that CMJ has in England, which is what this is from, who came from the Middle East this was founded in 1891. These are genuine costumes from there. And he was out in Israel, and he saw what he thought was a shepherd driving sheep. And he went up to the shepherd and said, "Sir, I thought that they would follow you." He says, "Oh, I'm not a shepherd. I'm a butcher." Big difference. But Jesus, the Good Shepherd, will lead his people. And we are to follow him. And beside still waters. A sheep will not drink from a running stream. It frightens it. So the shepherd, when he finds water, because you often get during the rainy season, you'll get them very fast moving, the streams. So what he will do is dig a pit right next to the river, make a pit, then make a channel so that the water can run in and then block it up, and then invite the sheep to partake. When we come to the Lord for nourishment, he doesn't frighten us. He feeds us and takes care of us, and we can come to him. He restores my soul, says the psalm. That obviously means by feeding and giving food and shelter. But it also, that word can mean to bring back. And a sheep will often wander away, not deliberately, but just nibbling at the grass and keeping its head down till it goes much further away. And the shepherd's probably sitting near the rest of the flock, and he doesn't want to leave them. So what he will do is he will take out his slingshot. And he will take out a stone. And he will get it out of here. I'm not going to be very good at this. So, and then he will hold it on his hand, fit it on his finger, and throw it round, let go. All right? And he will aim to go just beyond the sheep, to startle it, make it sit up, realize it's gone away, and come back. And he better be very good at it. Otherwise, he's going to kill his sheep with his stone. Do you remember David and fighting Goliath? Huh? He came to Goliath, and he must have been carrying these, because Goliath says, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" His rod and his staff. And David said, "No, I'm going to get you. I'm the best slingshot in Israel." Right? No. He didn't trust in this. He trusted in God. He said, "You've defied the God of the armies of the God of Israel, and he will deliver you into my hands." And he did. Why did David go and choose 5 smooth stones? Did he think he was such a bad shot he might miss? Goliath had 4 brothers, and he was prepared to take them on as well. And when he slung the stone, where did he hit Goliath? On the forehead? Well, skeptics tell us that the Philistines knew all about that weakness, and they had a piece of metal on their helmets like this. I laughingly say maybe that's how they found out. But the rabbis have an answer to that. They say David didn't aim for his forehead at all. In Hebrew, the word for forehead and the word for the piece of armor, the greave that protects the knee and the lower leg, the shin, have the same consonants. Metzach or mitzcha. And of course, there's no vowels in the Hebrew. And they say David aimed for his kneecap to incapacitate him and locked the stone behind the greave, which would explain how when Goliath fell, he fell forwards. If you hit somebody in the forehead when they're running, you're going to go backwards. But it fell on his face, it says. If you trip him up, that's exactly what will happen. And it also explains why David had to take out a sword, because he wasn't dead yet. It wasn't vindictive and just adding to the kill. So we don't know for certain, but those are some things that may help us understand that. So he restores my soul, and even though I walk through the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. If you go down into the Judean desert where David was, there's a lot of danger there, a lot of cliffs, a lot of very narrow passes up through the cliffs. I've been down in there, going down near Masada and that area. And there's all sorts of bandits and wild animals. David says he killed lions and bears and lions and bears. He would have used this. He'd have had to still get up close. But he would also have needed to protect the sheep from fast-moving things, like scorpions and snakes and those kind of things. So he would have had his rod and staff with him. I ask people usually, does this look very comforting? Probably not to you, but to the sheep, it is. The shepherd does not use this on his sheep. I've heard sermons about God's discipline hurts at the time, but it's not, it corrects us. That's of course true. But think where the sheep is, in the valley as dark as death. the valley of the shadow of death. Going through one of these valleys, the sun may not be able to penetrate it, even at noonday. So how does the sheep feel safe there? Especially if the shepherd's leading. Remember that. And you can go round the corner on a narrow path, and the sheep could easily get frightened and fall. So the shepherd takes out his rod and he bangs on the cliff face. And the sheep can hear it and know they're safe. And he's up ahead to make sure there's no wild animals in caves and things like that. So this is really making us safe. We may not be able to see Jesus with our eyes, but we can hear him. We can hear his voice. And if we stay close to him, we know we're safe. The shepherd knows his own sheep. When he's leading them out of the sheep pen, there's no fields or gates. Sometimes there's a cave, but often there's a communal enclosure, a sheep pen, if you like. And all the shepherds will come to that. And so how does the shepherd know? How does the shepherd know which sheep are his? They all have a name. He will name his sheep. And they learn his voice, and they will follow him when he calls them out. Again, Samuel Shaw tried this one time. He says to a shepherd, do you have a name for all your sheep? He said, oh, yeah. And do they know their name? Will they answer you? He says, yeah. He says, show me. So he had a flock of sheep, and he started calling Elizabeth, Joshua, and the sheep would move out one by one and come stand by him. And Jesus said, I know my own sheep, and they know me. But he also said, a stranger they won't follow, because they don't recognize him. So Samuel Shaw said, I'm a good mimic. Let me hear you do that. Let me dress like you so that I'll smell like you. And let me practice and then come back and try it. And so he did that. And when he felt he was ready, he put on the shepherd's clothes and started to call, Elizabeth. And the whole flock perked up their ears and ran in the opposite direction. He wasn't good enough. And they didn't recognize him. So we need to be able to recognize Jesus' voice, and then and follow him. And he will know us by name. It leads me through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I had a friend who believed that the scenery had changed and that was a banqueting hall. And all the folk he didn't like were outside, and he got a real nice meal here, and he could go, yeah, yeah, to you all, in the presence of my enemies. But the scene hasn't changed. We're still talking about the shepherd and the sheep. The shepherd prepares the grass even when he gets there. When he finds it, he still has to make sure, as I said, there's no snakes or scorpions, no wild animals. And so he protects the person, the sheep, in that area. And he would perhaps have some hog's oil as well, because snakes will not go through hog's oil, and neither will sheep. So if he finds a snake hole, he can put the hog's oil around it. And that will keep the snake in there and will keep the sheep away. And they'll be protected. So when the Lord prepares, again, I've said this before, when he prepares food for us, he will also protect us if we trust him and ask him to, from misinterpretations of his word and that kind of thing. We need his protection, even when we're reading the scriptures, because the devil can quote the scriptures. in the wrong places. Prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. And again, we're not now talking about choosing you and anointing you and welcoming you into a feast. We're still talking about the sheep. Here's where the rod is sometimes mentioned with regard to sheep, because in Ezekiel it says, I will make you pass beneath the rod. The shepherd is not going to use it on the sheep. But what he will do is when they get to the place they're going to stay at night, he will count off his sheep, and he will also make them go underneath the rod so he can examine them carefully and make sure they're all well and all safe. And the anointing with oil is finding when they've maybe gone under a thorn bush or something like that. You can get thorn bushes with 6-inch long thorns. They can do a lot of damage. And so he will actually take out his horn of oil and pour it into olive oil into where the wound is to bring healing and wholeness. And he will take care. And it says, my cup runneth over. Oh, well, maybe he's counting, and here's Joseph coming, and he's not got a drink earlier when I was by the river. And so I would take out a cup, and I'd also have a water bag. It's not something I've got with me. I didn't have one of those. And he would give that sheep a drink. All right? And it says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. So God's goodness and mercy would follow him. And it says, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. If a sheep gets too old to keep up with the flock, of course it would be vulnerable at the back of the flock and on its own. And so the shepherd would take it home to where his family were, and it would become a family pet until it died. But David says, we'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Suppose a shepherd has 100 sheep, and he's counting them off, and he gets to 99. Oh well, he's lost one sheep, hasn't he? But for my name's sake, I've led them through the paths of righteousness. I know the way, and I haven't lost them there, but I've lost him somewhere. What's the name of that sheep? Joshua. Yeah, it's Joshua who's gone. So for my name's sake, I must go find Joshua. Where are you? Oh yeah, I think I can hear you. Here you are. Okay. Rejoice with me. I have found my sheep that was lost. For my name's sake. As I said, shepherds were despised. But a shepherd who lost a sheep wouldn't be tolerated at all. He would be an outcast. And so, God, for his name's sake, will search for that one lost sheep. He wouldn't leave the others unattended. He'd allow the other shepherds to look after his flock in the communal sheep pen. Sometimes we hear of Jesus going after just the one lost sheep, but he takes care of the others too. And maybe when the shepherds went to Bethlehem, they all went, didn't they? So what did they do? They hired a keeper with a rod like that to protect the sheep while they were gone. Caravans going up to Jerusalem would travel together, and they would hire a keeper, and he would have a club like that rod to protect the sheep, the people. The only problem was some of their keepers had a day job as well, and they would fall asleep. But we read in the Psalm 121, "He that keepeth Israel will neither slumber nor sleep." So the Lord will watch over us. One more thing about Jesus as the Good Shepherd. When he was talking about that, he said, "Other sheep I have, who are not of this sheepfold. Them also I must bring, that there may be one flock and one shepherd." He was talking to Jewish people, and so obviously he was talking about Gentiles. The problem is, when we Gentiles came in, we tended to feel that the Jews no longer belonged. So I would like to ask you at this point to think about who the other sheep are today. Is it not the Jewish people? That God wants them to come into the one flock under the one shepherd. And I would encourage you to be involved with the Jewish community around here in loving them and sharing the fact that Yeshua is their good shepherd too.